Let me hit you with a thought experiment. Let's say that you are tasked with creating the next big Scooby-Doo project. You're trying to come up with the big bad of your story, and you've got this really cool, clever idea. And just as all the pieces are coming together, David Zaslav walks in and threatens to cancel the entire project and write it off as a tax break unless you scrap your villain. Literally. As in, make the villain Scrappy. Because, you know, he's in tune with what people like and don't like, and he heard that people really don't like this Scrappy-Doo character. In fact, it would be kind of funny and maybe even a little cathartic to see this annoying little pooch punished to the full extent of the law. The full extent of the paw. Now, maybe that would have been clever 20 years ago, and it kind of was.
Puppy power!
But now it's just low-hanging fruit. When HBO's Velma revealed that Scrappy was their big, monstrous villain across the two series, it was less of a edgy twist and more of a lazy, uninspired fart. Yeah, but it's way too easy to make fun of that show. Doesn't mean we shouldn't. But what about a modern Scooby-Doo show that fans actually like? Mystery Incorporated also had a reference to Scrappy-Doo, but rather than make him like a maniacal, whisker-twirling villain, they sort of just refer to him as a vague menace seldom to be spoken of.
I haven't seen...
Look away, Daphne. We all promised each other that we would never speak of him. Not ever.
So... this is where we are now. You know, I guess Scrappy-Doo, an adorable little cartoon puppy whose only crime is just loving his Uncle Scooby and potentially facilitating the sale of arms to Iran while using those proceeds to illegally fund a Nicaraguan right-wing counter-revolution, is a villain forever now. And you know what? Fine. Here's the deal, gang. I'm in the middle of some really deep research on a very big video about the history of Scrappy-Doo, his influence on the series, and maybe even a defense of the character. But would you believe it? That video ballooned into something that was way too long to be able to do by the end of this month when I have a sponsor deadline. So that video will come out in the future, maybe with a thumbnail like this. I don't know. But in the meantime, I wanted to talk about this concept, like Scrappy-Doo as a villain, right? Like, let's just meet the sort of cultural Scooby-Doo discourse where it's at. So you want to make Scrappy-Doo a villain in your next big Scooby-Doo project. Let's do it. But I think there's a better way. There is a modern, more adult take on Scooby-Doo that exists right now that actually gets Scrappy. Better than the movie did, better than the Velma show did, better than the one-off joke in Mystery Inc. I mean, all of these projects are trying to take the classic Scooby-Doo formula and sort of subvert it in an interesting way. But only one of them, I think, really nails the character. But we can't really appreciate it without me first explaining what I think all of these other things got wrong. And it starts with... So here's a question you might not have thought to ask. Why was Scrappy-Doo the villain in this movie? Content creator James Gunn, who is also the writer of these films, would lead you to believe that it's because he personally has some sort of vendetta against the character of Scrappy-Doo, but that's not true. I mean, it is true that he does loathe the character. He's mentioned it so many times. The amount of words that he has to say, it would lead you to believe that Scrappy-Doo did something personally to James Gunn. Jesus Christ, James. So yeah, I believe his hatred. What I don't believe is that alone is the reason why Scrappy ended up being the villain of this movie. And the reason I don't believe it is because on the DVD commentary of the first live-action Scooby-Doo movie, the director and the producers all explain that there were two other endings of this film, one of which was actually shot but just never used, and the other one was the original ending that was so complex and convoluted that they knew they could never actually film it. And both of those endings had absolutely nothing to do with Scrappy-Doo.
We had been struggling with a way to make this ending, flow better. And one of the facts of the matter was that the ending was too big. It had too many different pieces to it. And even after compressing it down and even after taking bits out of it, what we finally had after principal photography, when we cut it together, it was still too big and still too cumbersome and still had too many pieces.
It's really interesting, actually, listening to the commentary of this movie, because they were in the middle of filming it and they had no idea how it was going to end. They knew the plot points, they knew some of the character arcs, but they had no idea who the bad guy was going to. They didn't know what the big reveal was going to be at the end of this, children's mystery movie. It's a whodunit, but no one knows whodunit. Like, it sounds like I'm exaggerating, but no, that's pretty much verbatim what they say.
So the ending of the movie, at least, from this point on, was something that when we went into shooting it, if you remember, we didn't really have fully figured out.
By the way, this commentary track was not available anywhere online that I could find anyway. And even if I knew how to rip files from DVDs, I don't have a DVD drive for my computer at all. The only DVD player that I have is a PlayStation 4 that I haven't plugged in several years, and it has so much copyright protection that I had to Frankenstein so many different cables and connectors in things just to try and get this commentary track to work. You walk through life thinking that you're generally pretty good at using technology, and then something like this happens, and I lost a whole afternoon to that. But it felt important because this movie, I think, is where a lot of the Scrappy-Doo vitriol comes from, at least in the modern era, I guess. And it's wild to think that, according to this commentary track, it almost wasn't that way. So if you haven't seen the film in a while, it revolves around this mystical vegetable steamer named the Damon-Ritis. You can use it to perform rituals that summon demons and put them into people's bodies while taking out those people's souls. And then you can collect all of those souls and channel them through the Damon-Ritis. It's sort of a complicated plot device, I guess, especially when you start asking questions like, what was Scrappy's plan exactly? Did he just want to get big and become a big monster to get back at the gang? Okay, sure, that's fine, but what are all the monsters for then? And that question is actually answered when you start thinking about the original plan for the villain of this film, the one that they didn't shoot. Originally, the villain was supposed to be this otherworldly creature who was using the Damon-Ritis and the souls of these park visitors to build up an army of these monsters for the goal of taking over the world. Classic villain scheme.
When we were dealing with some of the early scripts and this monster sort of flew down from the sky, and he was going to, use the ultimate power to rule the world, and it was just sort of this anonymous monster in a way.
But everyone working on the film understood that it was kind of an unsatisfying villain reveal, because this was a creature that wouldn't have been established at any point previously in the film. It didn't really have a personal relationship with the Mystery Inc. gang. It would have felt like Scooby and them just sort of stumbled upon something that really didn't involve them in any capacity, which granted is how, most of the TV show episodes work. But I don't know, man, this is the live action Scooby-Doo movie, right? You want it to sort of feel like there's a reason this story is being put on the big screen. So then they ask themselves, what would be an emotionally satisfying reveal? Well, it'd probably be a character who is previously established in the film itself, one who has sort of a past history with Mystery Inc., and hopefully even a villain who the gang themselves are familiar with, so that they can have some sort of emotional response to that big reveal, which led them to the only logical choice. That's right.
Old Man Smithers!
We actually shot another way where Old Man Smithers, who was the bad guy from the opening of the movie, was going to be the ultimate bad guy.
This is the alternate ending that they did actually film, although footage of it doesn't exist publicly as far as I'm aware. And while I do think it is an improvement on the original idea of just sort of a nameless creature, it still sort of has the same issues that the Scrappy-Doo reveal has, right? So now Old Man Smithers is building an army of monsters. To do what? It doesn't really matter what ending they choose. Either way, you're going to have a literal army of monsters just hanging around, uncertain of their own purpose. Because again, their original purpose was to be an army that would take over the world in a plot point that they didn't end up using, but they already filmed a lot of, so they had to just go with it. So here's something that you might not have realized. Yes, James Gunn despised Scrappy-Doo, and it sounds like basically everyone on the crew also did.
We thought that was a great idea.
We as the filmmakers were all solidly in that camp, from James the writer to you and I.
We thought that was a brilliant idea, the idea that Scrappy would be the ultimate evil.
Whatever you think about Scrappy, he is annoying.
Yes, he is. He is definitely annoying.
General audiences, however, didn't feel that strongly about Scrappy-Doo. Like, they knew that he was considered annoying, and maybe even they themselves found him a little grating from time to time, but nobody wanted him to be evil.
Probably one of our most controversial choices in the movie, making Scrappy the bad guy.
But a lot of the people that we previewed the movie for had some concerns with Scrappy being the bad guy. I mean, there was a wide varying camps, I should say, because some parents understood that he was annoying, but didn't really get the fact that he was
Such a bad guy.
And that brings us to the main point that I would like to highlight in this video. Pop quiz. What do you think are Scrappy-Doo's personality traits? And don't just write annoying in the comments or anything like that, because I'll think you're talking about me and that'll make me sad. Actually try and put some effort into it. What do you think the character of Scrappy-Doo is like? As far as the original cartoon anyway. I would say fearless, foolhardy, perhaps, headstrong, but most importantly, he idolized his Uncle Scooby because he thought Scooby was all of those things. He thought Scooby was fearless and strong-willed, etc.
That's my Uncle Scooby, always rushing right into danger.
You know, we, the audience, could see that Scooby-Doo was a scaredy cat who ran away from all those pesky ghosts and ghouls. But Scrappy never really seemed to notice and genuinely believed that his uncle was the bravest, goodest dog. And even if Scrappy did notice that Scooby was scared, that would only strengthen his beliefs, right? Courage isn't about not having any fears. It's facing those fears constantly, even though you're afraid. That's what Scooby does. He is the bravest, goodest dog. James Gunn even says as much in his interview at the Scooby-Doo movie premiere.
I think the most important thing about Scooby-Doo is that he's the greatest cartoon character of all time. And the reason for that is he's a character who tells kids that it's all right to be afraid. And I really think that in this time, in this age, when there's so many things to be afraid about in the world, that's a great thing to be.
However, he also said this.
We tried to remain 100% true to the spirit of Scooby-Doo, to the being of Scooby-Doo. Just flesh it out, saying, what if these characters were real? What would they actually be like?
That's not true, James. I mean, remember, test audiences reacted very strongly and even negatively towards the idea of Scrappy being evil. So much so that even when they decided that that is how the movie should end, they had to ADR this line in at the very last minute.
We've discovered that the real villain behind this mystery is in fact Scrappy Cornelius Doo, who sadly was corrupted by the power of the Daemon-ritis.
See, guys, Scrappy isn't a big jerk. He was just corrupted by the Daemon-ritis. Except we also made him a big jerk in the flashback sequence for to make it easier for people to digest the idea that he could be a jerk, I guess.
We tried to remain 100% true to the spirit of Scooby-Doo.
Whatever you say, James. But okay, at least they tried to just slap this bandage of a line on last second to appease the people who do care about Scrappy. Velma didn't do that. Gosh, my leg is falling asleep and I have so many lights and equipment around me I can't stretch out. When the Velma series made Scrappy into a villain, they just barely tickled the idea that they could make him into a sympathetic villain. You know, he's a monster, but he doesn't want to be a monster. He's a science experiment gone wrong, who is ordered to be killed by the very people who brought him into this world. It's not his fault. It's sad. You know? Until this show reveals that that was all a lie and that Scrappy is really just a bloodthirsty monster who likes to bite people's dicks off. It's funny when the dog bites the penis. God, I wish the show just would have tried a little bit. This concept of Scrappy-Doo being a science experiment turned accidental murder monster could have actually worked. And I know that because a different story already did it. And it was good. That's right, longtime NerdSync fans. I read a comic book again. It's just like the old days. Scooby Apocalypse was a comic book series that ran from 2016 to 2019, I believe, and it reimagines the gang as a sort of ragtag group of teenagers who kind of know each other, and one of them has a dog, and then suddenly they're forced to survive in a sort of techno-apocalypse. There's a nanobot uprising that's turning people into monsters, and they're trying to stop it. They gave Daphne a gun. And then a few issues into the series, you sort of learn through a backup story that they're not only being pursued by these techno monsters, they're also being pursued by a different third party. And that third party is specifically wanting to track down and kill Scooby-Doo. Guess what? It's Scrappy, and just like the Velma TV show, he is a sort of science experiment turned into a muscly, brutish dog monster. However, this version of Scrappy somehow has more in common with his original cartoon counterpart than he does the Velma TV show. Remember what friend of the show James Gunn said earlier?
We tried to remain 100% true to the spirit of Scooby-Doo, to the being of Scooby-Doo, just flesh it out, saying what if these characters were real, what would they actually be like?
I think one of the hallmarks of a good adaptation are writers who really understand the characters that they're trying to bring to life in their story. They understand their personalities, their characteristics, their motivations, and they can still portray those, still stay true to the character while putting them in a different setting, or at the very least, while still telling the story that they want to tell, even if it's very different from the source material. You can change a lot about a character and still have them be recognizable in your adaptation, but I think you need the core components of those characters in order for it to work. I mean, that's almost literally what adapting something means. Now, we're going to revisit our list of Scrappy-Doo's personality traits here in a second, but I would like you to note the physical differences between Scrappy and Scooby, two dogs who are apparently related. Scooby walks on all fours, like a dog. Scrappy doesn't. He's bipedal for some reason. Scooby's speech is definitely more like a dog who's trying to speak human for the first time. It's like very much a representation of a dog trying to talk.
I don't know.
Scrappy just sounds like a person. He can string together very long sentences very coherently without any struggle, without any dialect of a dog at all.
Oh boy, monsters are all kind of people. Right, Uncle Scooby?
And I'm going to talk more about those differences in my big video about the history and like overall analysis of Scrappy-Doo. But if I was a writer, taking those characters and adapting them into my story that has like a dramatically different setting, those differences between these two characters would be fertile ground for exploration, which is why the comic does explore it. In Scooby Apocalypse, Scooby was the very first test subject to be one of these scientifically modified attack dogs. But he was seen as a failure because he couldn't speak that well, and he was pretty cowardly. Shaggy comes along, he's this dog trainer at this facility, and sort of unofficially adopts Scooby to just sort of be like a regular dog, like his pal. Meanwhile, all of the other dogs that were experimented on, like Scrappy, were not seen as failures. So they can't be adopted, and they can't have a somewhat normal life. They have to continue to be modified and experimented on. And it gets really sad, but I'm skipping ahead a little bit. So Scrappy, on complete contrast to Scooby, can talk in full sentences, is incredibly aggressive, doesn't have a fear in the world, and is basically the perfect specimen, the perfect outcome for these scientifically modified attack dogs. He even finds a way to unlock additional modifications that were hidden inside of him to turn from a regular looking dog to a more bipedal brute. Now, whether you like this idea or not, I hope you can tell that the writers of Scooby Apocalypse were at least thoughtful about this adaptation, taking those physical changes, those differences between the two characters, and making it make sense in that world. They were thoughtful in the fact that they had at least a thought, which is more than what I can say for the writers of Velma. But this Scrappy adaptation in the comic book goes even further, and now is when we're going to revisit our list of Scrappy's personality traits. I believe Scrappy is brave and headstrong and admires Scooby to the point of just wanting to be so much like his uncle. I mean, as we already discussed, part of what made Scrappy a successful experiment in this comic was that he was a fearless attack dog. At the start of this comic, Scrappy leads a small pack of other experimented on dogs and one human child, leading them through this monster apocalypse with, sheer brute force. He's not scared of the monsters out there. Mystery Inc. may be hiding from them as best they can. Scrappy and his gang are going out and fighting them. I believe they're even eating them for food. I mean, that was literally his role on the original cartoon, not the eating part, but, you know, going up, being the character who runs towards danger, not away from it.
Let me at him! Rough! He can't scare me!
You know, Scrappy never faced off against monsters in the live-action movie. He was the monster and commanded the monsters. He never fought against other monsters in Velma. He just killed people. So I love the idea that when taking this character and putting him in this setting for Scooby Apocalypse, they still kept that core tenet of him of Scrappy is the one who is going to beat up the monsters, or at least try to in the original cartoon, even if he wasn't successful. Here, he's very successful. But as I said, Scrappy is traversing this wasteland, looking for Mystery Inc., specifically wanting to kill Scooby. And I know what you're thinking, you know, this doesn't exactly sound like the Scrappy-Doo I was, building up a little bit earlier, saying that how much he loves and admires his uncle and wants to be like his uncle. How is that coherent with this idea of Scrappy wanting to kill him? Well, there's this fun little thing that writers like to use called nuance, because you quickly learn that the reason why Scrappy hates, just loathes Scooby-Doo and actively wants to harm him is because he's jealous of him. It's because he wants to be like Scooby. Scooby was experimented on, but he didn't change that much. He was still, at the end of the day, a dog. And he got to have a kind of normal life as a dog with Shaggy. I mean, he says this pretty much verbatim in the comic. He says, I resented the hell out of you. And you want to know why? Because I went through the program and it turned me into this. You went through it and you didn't change. So in a different kind of way, Scrappy still admires Scooby in this adaptation. Scrappy did not admire Scooby in the movie. They didn't really feel like they had a good relationship at all. In the Velma TV show, there really isn't an actual Scooby. There kind of is. It's complicated, but I don't know. This comic sort of gets at the heart of their relationship in a really interesting, sort of subverted way. He even leaps into a horde of monsters telling Scooby, don't ever change. Yeah, that's right. Scrappy is a menacing monster with a redemption arc in this story. He sacrifices himself to the nanobot creatures to give the gang time to escape. That is something the original actual Scrappy-Doo would do in a heartbeat. This is how you adapt Scrappy in a modern, subverted Scooby-Doo story. If you're gonna make him the villain, if you're gonna make him a monster, apparently that's where we're at, then this is how you do it. All you have to do is recognize his actual existing personality traits and flaws, instead of just turning him into a monstrous, power-hungry dick or a powerful, dick-hungry monster. Whatever you personally think of Scrappy-Doo, love him or hate him, I think we can all agree we've had enough of him as a villain, right? But I do get worried when there are announcements of a new, darker, live-action YA version of Scooby-Doo over at Netflix. Please, I beg of you, find a new villain. Better yet, make up one. That's what every episode of the original cartoon did. Now, a lot of people have asked me to make a video about this Netflix announcement, but to be completely honest, I didn't know it was fully confirmed. I thought it was just a rumor. But it looks like it has been covered by at least 10 outlets last month, and the biggest publications covering this story have a factuality rating of high, so yeah, I feel confident trusting these reports. And this information is super simple to find thanks to this video's sponsor, GroundNews, a website and app designed to help you pull back the curtain on media bias. For every story, you can see the reporting bias, factuality, ownership, and every headline, all backed by ratings from 3 independent news monitoring organizations. In fact, that idea of comparing headlines is really useful, more than you would think. Like, for example, Variety and The Hollywood Reporter have nearly identical headlines, but Deadline gives you added context that it's from Berlanti Productions, this Netflix YA show. And Berlanti Productions is the company that made all the CW, like Arrowverse shows and Riverdale. So you kind of understand a vibe of what they're going for with this show, and you get that just from the headline. And I definitely prefer that kind of headline compared to this one, which is clearly trying to generate outrage clicks by implying a show we have almost no details about is already worse than HBO's Velma somehow. One of the features that I love about GroundNews is the ability to copy and paste the URL of an article that you're reading into the search bar here, so it'll hunt down that article for you to scope out. For example, you might be wondering why Warner Brothers Discovery, a company that has their own streaming service, has announced that they're making this new Scooby-Doo show for Netflix. I was confused about that as well until I read this Hollywood Reporter article that was published earlier this month, and guess what? It's for a lot of goofy reasons. Shocker. GroundNews is a fantastic tool for sifting through the daily misinformation and bias. They provide all of the tools you need to become a critical thinker, and I cannot recommend it enough. In fact, I believe that GroundNews is so useful that I'm offering you 40% off of their Vantage subscription. And you can only access this discount through my link, so go to groundnews.com/NerdSync or click the link in the video description and support an independent news platform working to make the media landscape more transparent. I did it. I solved it. I mean, I didn't solve it. The writers of the comic book did. But I talked about a comic book again. That's exciting.